My name is Raine. I do speaking in a lot of different places, actually. I've spoken mostly at schools, talking to students in social work and sociology and psychology, explaining how my gender works. Is kind of the best way I say it. I end up answering a lot of questions about it. With social work majors, I answer questions about what problems they might see with trans individuals, how they can help them, and I always try and do it with an educational focus. So my panel is probably going to be a little bit dry in some areas. I do try and keep it fun and lighthearted in other ways too. And I'm always willing to accept questions, so if I ever say anything and you're like, wait, hold up, what? Just raise your hand and I will be happy to answer the question. I've spoken also for Pride-specific conferences in my regional area and in Boston, where I was invited to speak to talk about intersectionalities of the trans identity, which is where a lot of this talk is going to be coming from. Mostly addressing how my disabilities and passing always seem to intersect for me rather than because of me. So this is, again, about me. I'm bigender, non-binary. My pronoun is awesome. It's a long story. I have fibromyalgia, celiac disease. I have another autoimmune disease, which they can't pinpoint. Might be lupus, might be not. It doesn't ever flare up enough for me to be hospitalized yet. So until I have that immuno break or whatever, I'm just kind of watching my levels. So what is passing? I always address passing, especially when I'm talking about my identity, because I don't like to pass. I can't with fibromyalgia. I considered hormones for a very long time. And it was actually at the last time I did this talk that I met someone else with fibromyalgia. And he actually went to do hormones and it got worse, which was my big fear too. And fibromyalgia can be very debilitating. So it was kind of one of those things. But passing is a term used to describe an individual who is able to fully present as a gender they identify as without anyone knowing they were born as another gender. I'm sure everyone's kind of heard of this term in this room. It tends to be a more educated room. There's nothing bad about passing. And I don't ever want to say that passing is bad, because for some people, for many people, it's something they strive for just to fully feel themselves, and I think it's amazing. I address passing as how others use it to kind of dictate how individuals should be, rather than how an individual uses it. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm using passing or addressing passing as a way to attack someone for wanting to pass. I think it's wonderful. You get a lot of positive things from passing as an individual level. As a social level, I'm wondering how positive it is really where that comes from. And I kind of said that there too. Passing is complex and complicated term with a history just as complex. And I'll end up talking about that a little bit too, especially when we start looking at how it's used outside of the trans community, which some people don't often think about too, but passing is kind of used a lot, especially in the gay community. And then I talk about passing in pop culture. When Caitlyn Jenner kind of came out, I remember seeing in the news a lot of the first things people were going to say was, well, how is she going to look? Is she going to be woman enough? Is she going to be good enough? Where is she going with that? Has she already done it? There was never a moment to kind of let her be in the news after she came out. We have more people. Welcome. She was immediately addressed with, will she pass? And then I don't know if anyone else remembers a lot of the news articles around it, addressing, will she be a good enough woman? Will she be able to handle being a woman? Will she be pretty enough? Will we want her? I censor myself. And I thought it was really odd that we get a really, in my opinion, she may not be the most wonderful individual to look towards in terms of the trans community, but it was the first real moment where we, in pop culture, had a moment to really address what transgender was. And it was never given the full light that I think it kind of deserved, because people were so busy saying, will she be woman enough? And this is really something that I thought was important to highlight, because looking at her story, when she kind of talks about it, she hasn't really had a chance to talk about it until her TV show, but often whether or not she was passed was immediately used against her. If she had come out still looking more masculine, if she couldn't afford the surgeries right away, if she couldn't, I wonder how the story would have been different. And I wonder how it would have perhaps felt more aggressive in terms of the articles and discussion around her. So when I look at how passing in pop culture is used, I move into the passing continuum. Passing, like I said before, is a complex identity. But it starts really far back, actually, in Stonewall. Who knows of Stonewall? Oh my God, I love you. This is the first time everyone's raised their hand. And actually, I know. Well, no, at a Pride conference for an LGBT center, only like 4 people raised their hands for Stonewall, and I was like, so I went into a whole discourse explaining the whole history of how the Stonewall riots started, because people were asking questions, so I ended up spending like 15 minutes explaining our history, which is, to me, a little odd, because Stonewall is so iconic. And it's so hard because so many people try and erase what it really was. When you see Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and these really iconic drag queens, transgender individuals who kind of put themselves out there and said, enough is enough, I just want to let be. I can't fully pass, but I just want to be. And it's, to me, when you see what happened after Stonewall, especially in New York City with the Gay Liberation Front starting and the removal of trans identities and trans rights from LGBT communities, it really starts to show to me what passing really meant towards the community. Because for anyone who doesn't know, the Gay Liberation Front turned into HRC eventually, and many of those people went there, and they've kind of been big proponents of we'll come back for the trans community. Or we'll come back for you if you're not white or gay. Or, middle class. Anything really positive for us to look good in America. And so when I look at passing, I also want to address how it's used, especially in the gay community, which before I came out as trans and realized I was really trans, it was something that I dealt with a lot was, are you straight acting? Well, what's straight acting? I used to play rugby. I played rugby in a skirt once. So is that straight acting or was it not? I've so far never heard an answer on whether or not it was. But it's a term that's used often in the gay community, and it's one that I often struggle with as a non-binary individual, because I will walk into a bar one day looking very boyish, and I will be considered the boy to look at, and then I will come in the next week and I will walk in heels and everyone will be, and it's just not the best experience, especially when they want to address my situation in the bathroom and lock me in. But this is, again, I just want to say that passing isn't inherently negative. It's how it's used to police people, which is odd. Why are we policing people when we ourselves want to be free to be who we are, especially in the gay community? We fought so hard in Stonewall to just kind of be and let be and just sort of let ourselves exist, that it's still being used. So I did this little sentence here at the bottom. If passing is used as a means of quantifying one's ability to be deemed normal and socially acceptable, we further marginalize and alienate those who cannot achieve its rigid definition or don't wish to adhere to that definition. And by saying you cannot achieve, it's a lot of different reasons for that. It's a class system that comes into play. It's disabilities that come into play. It's so much that come into it that are often overlooked, actually. The last time I gave this talk, a bunch of people in the room came up to me afterwards and said, I've never heard someone talk about disabilities before. In the trans community, that's really odd. So many of my friends who are trans have disabilities themselves, whether it be mental or physical. So it's really odd to me that's something that's not often used in the trans discourse, but really even in queer studies, it's rarely ever brought up. I've only heard of it once or twice in a classroom setting as like a brush over sentence. This should be reflection on passing. I've kind of been doing this, I just haven't been moving the slides. I apologize, everyone. If passing isn't inherently negative as a concept, we have to start to begin acknowledging the complexities of gender itself. So when we start to open up ourselves to the broader understanding, we start to see that passing isn't something that really is inherently specific. Passing itself can be based on personal, cultural, or individualistic identities. And some of these identities have long histories in themselves. I'm a Native American Two-Spirit, which I'll talk about more later. I got it from my father. And that identity is very complex and has been seeing, thankfully, a much more rise in understanding. And it's still being fought by Native Americans, though, as an acceptable term. Moving beyond the binary and outside the realms of passing, we begin to see intersectionality of gender as a diverse and complex identity, one that has a rich and deeply complex historical identity within itself. A little tongue-tied there, I apologize. So when I go into the next slide, actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about history. Oh, wait, is that? There we go. Whew, I almost jumped past that. That would have been awkward. Transgender is a new concept, though I've heard recently that it was by some people, especially if you hear the discourse in America where this is just a new trend, it's a fad. Especially on Fox News, apparently, they like to say that a lot, that being trans is a new fad. I was a little confused by that. So it actually has a long history. And I'm sorry, everyone, that this is probably a little bit more of the drier discourse. Hopefully I can get into something more exciting. But the trans identity actually is early documentation in River Valley civilizations. Third sex instances dating prior to 1700 BC, and in Egypt they had ties and him. I don't know how to pronounce them, but I'm told I'm not close at all. But I think it's interesting to point out this because often, especially after Western influence, we saw the erasure of a lot of different identities, a lot of different ways of expression, especially in America and in India and in Africa and anywhere that colonization kind of took over and said no. And as a personal look into this, as I said earlier, I'm a two-spirit individual. My father was fully Native American. My good friend who passed away recently was Native American, and she helped me kind of explore this identity because I could not speak with my father. And this identity is really complex in itself because each tribe has a different look at it. For me, it just says to me that I am kind of the line between masculine and feminine, that I contain both masculine and feminine energies within me, and that I exist kind of in the line between both worlds. I could talk about other identities too, as I do a lot of study of this on my own time. Kind of come from a sociological anthropologic background. So if you have questions about some of the history, I'm always happy to point you into some of the reading or research that I use to find it. I tend to get one or two people who do want to see more about it, and I'm happy to help you. Oh, bless you. So when it comes to the thoughts on identity, often within the discussion of trans identity, there are cases of full erasure of an identity of an individual. And what do I mean by that? Well, I often have people forget to include that disabilities is a part of someone's identity. Mine are. I can't exist without them at this point. They can't go away. So it is a part of my identity. But often it's just looked at without ever talking about it fully. The trans aspect of an identity is used as a scale to weigh the rest of an individual's identity. In the original talk I did, I actually looked heavily at trans health fails on Twitter. Has anyone seen that? Some of the discussion on there I will cover here instead, so you won't have the full slides to see. An individual with autism was spent a full 24 hours with discussion about whether or not his autism was causing his belief he was transgender. That's one way I do it. An individual with a broken leg spent an hour with someone asking them about their genitalia, if they were transitioning or not. He had a broken leg, but apparently whether or not he had a penis was also important to the discussion. And actually, I hadn't had a trans health fail until this past week. Bravo me. I had bad food poisoning and ended up going to my school's doctors. As I'm there being sick and all, she starts asking me about my name. And I'm like, it's Raine. I'm gonna throw up, excuse me. And then she's like, are you gonna transition? What? I'm here for a stomach bug. Why are you asking me about transitioning? My primary care provider has that fully covered, whether or not I will. So I found it really amusing that was just a straight question that someone who had no right to ask me felt that comfortable asking. And then when I said that I wasn't, she said, "Oh, that's probably good. It's a really complicated thing." Oh, okay. I hadn't realized that aspect of it. Thank you. Awesome. And it turns out she was a former nun, so I'm kind of like, all right, I kind of get the sentiment, but it was just one of those moments where I'm like, literally here with food poisoning, and you just asked me about what I'm doing with my junk. Like, this is so confusing to me. So to make this more games related, I actually turned it into kind of a personal look at my exploration of identity through game characters. So it's actually really odd to me, especially when I've seen some newer game characters come out and think, oh, they're doing something great over there. Especially when I see some new game characters and I go and talk to one of the developers I know and I'm like, well, why was this character given a gender? And more often the statement I get is, well, it's easier for people to understand. We just did it at the last minute, we just threw it in there. Why? And they never really have a full answer for it. In fact, the one game character, half of the team was calling them with she pronouns, and the other half was calling them with he pronouns. So how did you decide on the gender when everyone on the team was kind of giving them their own way of connecting to the character? So I found it odd that they still ended up giving it a character, and I'll show you which character that is later. So let's get into the first characters. I hope people know these two characters. Vivi is one of my favorite characters of all time. I've never connected more to a character in my life. Questioning who you are, why you exist, what is your purpose, I think is something we all question when we're teenage, angsty little children. But Vivi was a character to me that really, to me, expressed something that was more non-binary. Even though they somehow had children. Which I'm still not sure how that happened as a robot, potentially. But, I'm down for it, why not? When I played the game of Final Fantasy IX for the first time, I was actually 12 years old. I would come out originally as trans a couple years later and was told that I wasn't allowed to be trans in my family. So I decided not to be trans and never talk about it again. But Vivi and Quina themselves were both characters to me that expressed a level of androgyny or indifference to gender expression as a whole that really, then the fourth time I played it through more recently, I really spent a moment in awe going like, why didn't I connect sooner to the fact that most of the characters in Final Fantasy IX don't even fit in normal gender roles? I mean, if you look at them, even Zindane and Dagger kind of exist outside of it in some different way. Deciding to cut her hair, look more of a boy, take on an androgynous name. I've never connected more to a female character. And then Zindane, you eventually find out, is through a cloning process of some sort. Never really looked at in depth, but he may or may not actually be a gender and may be agender, which I thought was fascinating. That they took the entire game about identity and made it just for me. because I'm all those characters at some point in my life. I think we all have a game like that where we connect identity-wise towards a game where we're like, it's me. You're not going to be in my party until you're level 100, everyone else is level 50. And so, looking on to some of the other games that I played for a long time, Galkas. My favorite race in Final Fantasy XI, the race that reproduced by just walking off into a desert and then coming back as a child. It's me again. So if I ever tell you I'm going off to a desert, just assume a small child will come walking out. It will still be me, just as a small child, because I'm secretly immortal. No longer a secret. I played Final Fantasy 11 for, oh my god, till last year. Don't judge my life. I played Final Fantasy for 11 for a long time. It's actually why I'm a Final Fantasy fanboy. I don't hate myself for it. I love Final Fantasy, even though 13 was a little odd. I liked a lot of the characters in it, just not as dynamic as I'm used to. But Galkas were the race I picked because at that time I was struggling with my body a lot. I both wanted to be a massive, gigantic being that could just squash everything and then also not have a gender. So it kind of fits for me, especially when I have body dysmorphia and other issues with my body as being skinny. Galkas gave me a chance to kind of explore my identity as a big hulking brute, which I think we all wish we could be at some point, is something a little bit stronger to kind of protect ourselves or a little bit stronger to intimidate others. But it really actually made me reflect upon why I wanted to be that way. And when I went to Final Fantasy 14, I actually looked at the fact that the Galka equivalent Rogaidans kind of had a female variant of them, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And ended up being my main character was a female Rogaidan. Because you see the same kind of hulking status, the muscly status, the fact that it's a female who isn't ashamed to be well-muscled or masculine in terms of tone and body. You see her kind of be that way anyways, even as a mage, which I like doing. Getting into the next most recent character is a League of Legends game character. How many people play League of Legends? Oh, good. There's a few people, so I'm not hopefully too nerdy for everyone. I'm a Riot fanboy too. It's a problem. But when I actually heard about Bard, I was like, oh my gosh, this could be the character. This could be the one. It's a being from another dimension that only talks through song. Can we make it a gender, please? Can it be my gender? Nope, it's a boy. So close. But actually this character, I had talked to one of the devs about it and they kind of said we didn't really think of it as giving it a gender until really the last few months of development. And right until they did the kind of write-up for it, it was just Bard, which I thought was an odd thing to do, especially when League of Legends has kind of been the brunt of critique for an overly kind of stylized characters that are almost too sexual, and then with their female characters, that they wouldn't try and kind of diversify a little bit more since it is a big part of their company's identity structure. But again, we see another character that I readily identify with. And before I continue on, I wanted to know if anyone else has characters that they identify with. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying,
Jeff.
Zero from Borderlands.
Zero from Borderlands. Yeah. Anyone else has characters they want to share? Yeah. Oh, I love Soraka, the little celestial being who fell from the heavens and heals everyone. She's such a fun character, and when she's overpowered, she just destroys games. And when she's underpowered, she just kind of sits there and spams heal, and then dies. Kind of like me. Does anyone else? Yeah.
I always really liked Laguna on Fantasy A.
Okay.
He's a cool character to spy actually. He's somebody who's relaxed, curious himself, and wants to make the world better.
Yeah. I've never played Final Fantasy 8 as much as I wish I could, and I've also never played Final Fantasy 7. Spike real quick.
The one for me that I really identify with is actually Terra from Final Fantasy VI.
Yes.
Coming to terms with myself as a gay youth when I played it, and she had this whole other form that she was just really afraid of and had to eventually accept and learn to become one whole with herself. It was really, for me, definitely a part of my formative process of accepting.
It's a very cathartic experience when you find a game character like that kind of really goes through the same journey you're going through. So yeah, I get that 100%. Yeah.
So, a character that's really important to me as a teen was Wade Chrono Trigger.
Oh, yes.
There's palette is beautiful and that goth palette. And that stuck with me for decades because I didn't have, like, as a young teen, I didn't have the term non-binary or even trans, but I was like, this is what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, that's great. I really quick, I get that a lot, especially when you look at Final Fantasy 9 or Final Fantasy X's main villains. They're kind of that way too a little bit. Kuja was very kind of a very flippant, flamboyant character who kind of existed outside of the binary in many ways too, actually, in thinking about it. I'm surprised I don't connect more with them, but maybe it's because I'm so used to kind of trying to fight them and then having that moment where you cry, saving them.
This is really super recent. It's not like a story, but I don't know if anybody's played the ADV's game.
Okay.
Venus from that was really,
Oh, cool.
yeah, that's the transfer. Like, really good in a good way.
What's the game again?
It's called We Know the Devil. It's all, it's,
We Know the Devil.
It's like a visual novel, but it's all kind of about, like,
Oh, I love
being
visual
around your
novels.
queerness. And it's really good. It's like, it's good. I'm not going to rant about it.
No, I am happy to hear a rant about it. Like if it's a game that inspires someone, I think it's something that's really fun to hear about. Even I mean, if we can do it. Oh no, view Sonic. Come on. Oh. It's back. We can keep Bart up for now. They're pretty like me. Coming on, everyone's supposed to laugh. But no, even in ROM, actually, I know that was made mostly by a queer development team, and a lot of people who help run this con, I connected to Turing too, as a conceptualized individual that kind of was just, I'm gonna help you, but maybe not. So I think it's interesting to talk about characters in games like that.
Sorry, just one thing. I don't know if you went to this yesterday, the panel on Bigender, that was fantastic.
I end up getting here really late, but I wish I would have.
About, like, how queer identified people connect with Bayonetta and like how her combat style is denial. Like
Yeah.
like the man tries to attack you, literally dodge it, and then they're frozen and beat the crap out of them, which is like really like weaponized like denial of being touched, which is fascinating. Anyways.
No, that's fascinating. I think it's really, Bayonetta to me has always struck out as kind of a character that I think a lot of people will connect to as a strong badass woman who's not afraid to kind of be sexually appealing but also kick your ass. I think we all have those moments where we just want to be very like pretty in how we look but also kind of be left alone. Which is often hard to do both. If you're feeling very pretty and very yourself, oftentimes it's the most time you get critiques for it, which is really odd when you think about it. And going back to Final Fantasy VII and why I didn't play it, since I think I offended people. I got through half of the game of Final Fantasy VII before my game. I apparently skipped getting Tifa and a whole town. Not Tifa, Yuffie, the one that steals stuff. I skipped a whole town and I went right to Red's story. It broke my game. And I'm like, all right, I don't like any of these characters. This is not like Final Fantasy IX at all. I am so done. I did play most of 8. I have a big problem. I'll get to like the last boss in a game and I'll just be like, oh, look at the time. I gotta go. So there's so many games just sitting on my PS2 that I'm just like, I didn't finish this. I'll play it again later. And I think it's because I'm fascinated with not letting a story end, especially with characters that I love. Because I think we all kind of have that moment, especially with like books or games, where you get to the end of a story and you're like, goodbye. And so when I go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the erasure of more complex identities, which I thought was a little bit fitting following a character like Bard, who I thought really had the potential for a complex identity, although to me as a normalized identity as potentially being that's agendered. The larger picture here points out that curiosity of being trans is still a justifiable means to erase of someone's complex identity. I often face that too. Other stories included were those were non-binary being asked to eat. Oh, yes, this is about trans health fails. I thought I'd removed all of them, but I didn't. As I mentioned earlier, for some of those who came in late, I talked about the trans health fails a little bit on Twitter. In the original panel that I talked about this, I actually talked about trans health fails a lot. So it was asked about whether or not they would pursue surgeries or say how you are or other things. What if it intersects with someone who realistically shouldn't get surgeries at all? A trans individual I know, he has a blood clotting disorder. Got his tonsils out 3 years ago. He coughs hard enough and it rips open because it just doesn't heal right. So what does that mean for him as a trans individual who's a trans male? It means no top surgery is safe for him. That's a pretty large scar for a mastectomy on both sides. If it takes him 3 years to heal, how realistically safe is that surgery? And realistically, it's not. It's a life-threatening surgery for him. Even more so, he can't do any other surgeries for it. The trans male individual who was in my last panel and talked to me about fibromyalgia with the group said that he had undergone hormones and his issues started to get worse and worse. And that's a big concern of mine as someone with fibromyalgia is, well, how would hormones affect me? And I kind of learned a little bit recently in terms of how the potential for it would be when I had to start taking a steroid for medical reasons. The steroid works like progesterone. For anyone who doesn't know what progesterone is, it kind of counterbalances testosterone, makes your body store a lot of fat and kind of slow down a little bit. So what happened to me when I'm on it and still on it is I find myself having a harder time staying awake. I'm much more fatigued easier. My pain levels will spike a little bit quicker. For those who don't know what fibromyalgia is, it's a pain and fatigue disorder. Allodynia is my biggest problem. It's when something to touch hurts me. I struggle with tactile and mechanical. It means brushing against me or pressure can hurt me significantly on some days. I've actually woken up in bed crying from a blanket, shamefully. I try not to let it get to me too much, but it is one of those things where now that I'm on potentially seeing the side effects of what progesterone will do, what will happen when I get more. And I already struggle enough to just stay with season school. Gosh, trying to struggle against it more would just be really daunting to me, especially now when I'm trying to get into the video game industry as potentially work there. How competitive is that? If I'm not being twice as competitive as the person next to me, I don't think I'll even get looked at for an interview. But often, I find that people don't give a chance for disabilities to be talked about. And there's also the erasure of the possibility of gender euphoria or gender dysphoria. Gender euphoria is the belief that, gender euphoria, who knows what that means? Gender euphoria is a newer term, kind of being thought up by psychologists and queer studies majors and me. I've heard it a lot, and it's really kind of something that I identify with. Gender euphoria is the opposite of gender dysphoria. It means when you express or present in the gender you prefer to, you feel enlightenment or happiness in a way that you don't normally experience. And this is something that's really important for me because when I talk about it, I experience gender dysphoria whenever I look in the mirror. I wish my body was more feminine. Although thankfully the steroids are helping me gain some weight, which is blessed. 30 pounds so far. That's kind of helpful when you're not trying to look all like skinny and like sick, which I normally do. But then when I think about it, if I were to fully, let's say in like 10 years, I decide to do HRT, I look at going into surgery, I get all the surgeries I wanted and I feel finally there and I look in the mirror, well, how will I feel? A lot of my nightmares involve me waking up and looking at me as a woman who's pregnant. So knowing that I can never have a child of my own kind of affects me in an odd way. Will I undergo HRT and all the surgeries and all the work? And then will I feel dysphoric about it? Because I'm not going to be the female I wish I could be. I won't be able to give birth to a child unless they come up with some new revolutionary surgery, which I'll be the first one to sign up for. I won't be able to realistically be a biological parent at all either because I was born sterile. Long story. So what does this mean? Well, that make my dysphoria worse. I'll have the body I've always dreamed of wanting, the body I've dreamed of having, but will it be my body? So that's an interesting thing for me. And it's one that I kind of use games, again, as a way to explore. When I played Pokemon for the first time that had a female character, I was like, oh, can I pick the female? Will I be allowed to? Well, I can't trade Pokemon with anyone I know then. It'll only be my character. I can't let other people see it. And it was kind of like the first game where I was able to kind of be a girl, which I think is really odd to say out loud, but it was. I was always kind of ashamed of it at first, but games kind of gave me that first stepping stone into being trans as an individual. And actually so did a book that I'm going to give a shout out to. It's called Don't Be a Fag by C.J. Pascoe. Dude, You're a Fag, sorry. Dude, You're a Fag by C.J. Pascoe. She's a sociologist who looked at how the word was used in high schools as a way to moderate someone and take away their power, basically. The term fag wasn't used as a homophobic slur, but as a way to denote someone's power in that moment and say that you aren't masculine enough to be with us. You aren't masculine enough to be around us. And it's actually a really interesting book. It's very sociological based, so there's kind of a lot of research in it. Yeah. Everyone says it's super dry, but I read it in like a day and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. But it is kind of a dry read depending, because she's very analytical about it. And actually, I met her and she signed my book because I convinced my school to bring her out. Yeah. Dude, You're a Fag. Yeah.
But I've seen a lot of trans community using the word fag, and I kind of wondered where it comes from, like, kind of owning it.
Yeah.
And I think probably that's where.
Yeah, well, I think the term, I'm not sure if it comes from her. I would like to think so because I love her as an individual, having met her. But I'm not really sure where it would. I would be interested to see where it comes from. I mean, we could look into the past a little bit and perhaps see how it's kind of been used. Maybe they're trying to use it like the word queer is now used as a way to kind of take away some of the power and focus it more towards the studies aspect of it. I've even heard a case for, sorry if this will offend anyone, the tranny word, and its long, complex history too, where it was originally used by drag queens in New York City and other areas and kind of their drag communities, and then it kind of disappeared, and then a lot like transvestite, kind of words that never really had a proper place and kind of going away. But I've heard some people try and use it now as a way to say, well, I am what I am, and perhaps maybe they're using the word fag in that way too. It's interesting how words like that kind of change again. I mean, we see it a lot, especially in common culture, especially with the N-word being discussed heavily, more often by people who shouldn't be discussing the N-word heavily, and how it should be used. My favorite picture that was on the internet for a while was when you saw, like, which of these is the worst word, cracker or the N-word? Well, we know right now from that sentence. I think I went a little fast, actually, in this discussion. Oh, no, I didn't. Oh, it's been 45 minutes. Okay, cool. I was so nervous. So I normally go, like, really talk fast, and I normally have a hard time letting everyone hear everything. If anyone who came in late wanted to see some of the slides or talk to me about it, you're more than welcome to. But kind of like what we did with the game characters, if anyone has any questions or comments or things they want to bring up, I'm happy to hear it. I love talking with the people who hear me talk. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to throw in relative to something you said earlier when you were, forget your exact words, I apologize. You were saying something like a female character in Pokemon was like her first chance to be a girl.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's strange. Like, that was a huge part of gaming for me. Was like in Super Mario Brothers 2, I could be the princess. And
Oh my, and I remember that.
she was much more useful than Mario. And
Mario was so bad in that game, actually.
there was no shame using her.
There's still no shame in using her in Brawl, apparently. She's a beast. Him and then you.
Talk about non-binary characters. It occurs to me that the alcohol in Mass Effect, I think, are non-binary. And they also, there's a way they speak because they don't understand or express emotions.
I wish I had played Mass Effect more. I'm gonna have to go back and look into that character more. The race. Sorry, I meant to say race and I said character, and I'm sorry. I do remember them, but I don't remember them very well. So it's fascinating too, is how, especially with a game like Mass Effect, I think I'm surprised that they didn't just make them that way. And actually, in thinking about it, I've been watching a lot of Star Trek lately, a lot of the older series, and I saw in the Enterprise series they had a third gender for a race. It was a really kind of sad episode, but it was interesting to see it. And then it's interesting to me how often Star Trek has kind of explored gender as a concept in ways that I really didn't expect to see. But yeah.
I don't want to assume the age of everybody here, but a lot of us grew up kind of when the internet was exploding. I think
Yeah.
digital identities are the way a lot of people in our generation
Oh, yeah.
grapple with the notion of like non-binary identity and even queer identities outside of gender identities, right? Like some of my earliest STEM experiences were online or with digital characters. This idea of embodying otherness, right?
Oh, I agree completely, and I think it's why I find it odd when people are like, well, all these people are just being trans because it's a trend, and that's not true. It's because with the internet and the exploration of identity being such an easy tool now, people are seeing the history of it. People are seeing a connection to it before that they haven't perhaps been able to. If you're in this small town Oklahoma, you're not going to probably ever meet someone who is trans or know what the word trans really is, or even really kind of be able to understand it as anything but this is different and this is bad.
Prior to like the advent of non-binary identities in that discussion, a lot of people, like myself, didn't feel we were trans enough to adopt those labels and those ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's
I've heard that before a lot,
there's
actually.
This, like self-denial in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the internet, I think, has enabled like us to really see the breadth of trans and non-binary identities in a way that like a lot of people died not even being able to ever express the
Oh, yeah.
diversity of that. Whereas now, you know, it's a little further away.
I definitely get that 100%. Yes, you.
For me personally, exploring my own intersectional identities through games, because I pretty broke most of my life.
I think we've all been there at some point. Oh, cool.
Characters and like pouring different aspects of my identity into all these different characters and combining them. And it was really fun for me to sort of. And it wasn't. And my parents are actually the ones who introduced me to tabletop role-playing games. And
Okay, cool.
they're actually the ones that pointed out, you know, you've always played a male character. Pretty feminine male characters.
Down with the bourgeoisie. But no, I think that's actually really cool because I've never really thought of it. But yeah, I guess it's tabletop games are just kind of a real life way of exploring a game identity too. I think I have time for like one or two more statements. So I'm going to do him and then you.
I will want to follow up on what he was talking about, because I didn't have a game identity that I really connect with the same way you guys do, because like in the background is different than playing with Final Fantasy. But for me, tabletop games was always a way to explore different, like to test things and try out these different aspects of being, and you know, what would it be like if I was like this? So I can create a character that's like this and try to explore that table without necessarily having to have it intrude upon who I actually am in day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool actually to hear how tabletops have been used like that.
I was going to comment about you being able to choose like girls and option Pokemon. I thought it was like really huge for me to be able to do a brown girl Pokemon actually.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the first time that like I actually like when I heard about it, I was like, that's actually something that's always missing in video games for me. Is like actual brown or black girl characters who play. And I know like canonically people are making arguments about like Samus and Birdo and Vivian from Super Mario Bros. In Your Door for being canonically trans.
Mhm.
But it's like none of these are essentially women of color, and like
Yeah,
trying
and
to find that aspect too, because like I don't see myself in white women. Like they don't look like me, they don't behave the ways that I do, or like have the background that I do. So you know when you look at someone like Princess Peach, it's like I will never be that, no matter like if I'm trans or not. So I've been trying to find more women of color games, and there's like Mirror's Edge
Yeah.
things like Dragon's Dogma, where you can create your own women characters that are like more masculine and like also like different skin tones and things.
Even Dark Souls and stuff like that too, you were kind of able to make a character that was kind of fitting of who you are. And I'm sorry we didn't talk about that, but as I'm not someone who is a person of color, I don't feel often comfortable talking about it. But especially with the issues that trans women face as being of color, is often a very different and often more harsher experience than I have, which is scary for me to think about knowing my experiences. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I thought it was pretty revolutionary too. I didn't even know they did it until I bought the game, and I was like, whoa, wait, what? Pokemon, you're being more cutting edge than most of the big games with larger budgets. Come on, people, get it together. Okay, last one, really quick.
With everyone talking about how they, like, how video games kind of brought them to some, like, understanding of trans identities and whatnot, I had kind of an interesting, like, slight variation on that story where video games helped me understand trans identities through trans game creators.
Oh, yeah.
When I was about 10 years old, I bought a book about the history of video games, and there was a chapter that talked about a game designer named Danny Bunton-Berry, who was a
Yes.
yeah, a trans woman who would like transitioned a little bit after she left the industry, but the chapter still referred to her as a trans woman, even though like she did all of her career was before she had transitioned.
That's
And,
wonderful,
yeah,
actually.
and that
I'm really
was-
happy to hear that.
Yeah, like in retro, like years later, I appreciate how good that was that they did that, and that was my first encounter with like my first understanding of transgender people, and I think that was really like that very strongly shaped my understanding of gender going forward, and was really like a really important stepping stone in my development.
That's really awesome, actually. And quick shout out to Porpentine. I don't know if anyone has played. Her games give me life when I am so frustrated with everything. Those We Love Alive was the creepiest, weirdest exploration of my identity I've never wanted to deal with, but loved so much. It's always I always go into her games like, am I gonna be okay at the end of this? Probably not.
Her say once that assume all my characters are trans once they say otherwise.
Yes, yes. I love her as an individual and as just someone who makes amazing games. So, yeah. Thank you, everyone, for coming out and skipping out on that panel to come to mine. I really appreciate it.